Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Steve Case, chairman and CEO of Washington, D.C.-based venture capital firm Revolution and the co-founder of AOL, to discuss the main arguments from Steve's book, Rise of the Rest, now available in paperback. Note the hard copy of the book is already available to the public and came out on September 27th, 2002. Steve, it is great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Great to be with you.
You got it. What was the genesis for the Rise of the Rest, and what is the overarching theme?
We started this almost a decade ago with the idea that there are great entrepreneurs all over the country, but most people are only focusing on the entrepreneurs on the coast, particularly venture capitalists, that 75% of venture capital over the last decade has gone to just 3 states, California, New York, and Massachusetts. Those are 3 great entrepreneurial states, but there are 47 other states that are already showing a lot of momentum. And we wanted to shine a spotlight on what they were doing. We launched a bus tour initially, then we launched a venture fund. And so far we've invested in over 200 companies, 100 different cities, 37 different states. And it is really remarkable what's happening. And even the pandemic has been in a surprising way, an accelerant. It's sort of a tipping point, because some people in the last few years have decided to move someplace else. Some investors on the coast have decided, given they can do Zoom pitch meetings, to invest in other places. So we really are seeing an acceleration now, and it's good for the entrepreneurs in these places, and good, obviously, for these communities, because they get the benefit of job growth, economic growth in different parts of the country, not just a few places.
Yeah, and we get the benefit of diversity of thought rather than just being in San Francisco or in Chicago or in New York. So with that said, which U.S. cities and tech sectors are driving innovation right now?
Well, first, I want to build on what you said. Entrepreneurs essentially see a problem and decide to do something about it. And people see different problems depending on where they live and what kind of experiences they're having. So this does give us more shots on goal. In terms of the question about cities, the really surprising and I think encouraging thing is it's not just 2 or 3 or 4 cities on the rise. It's literally several dozen. And that's what I try to cover in the book. We profile 35 different cities that have different dynamics going on that are showing real momentum, often building on a sector where there's domain expertise. In Detroit, for example, the automobile sector, or in place like Chattanooga, the trucking and logistics sector. But sometimes there are also new companies that are emerging in places that kind of would surprise people. There's no particular reason for it. Like in Atlanta, there's a company called Hermeus we backed, is building a Mach 5 engine. So you can go from Atlanta to Europe in 90 minutes. They've gone on, after we seeded that, to raise $175 million. The Air Force is now a customer. Most people would assume a company like that was in California, but it's really in Atlanta. I could give you dozens of other examples of cities on the rise and companies that are choosing to start and scale there, as opposed to 10 or 15 years ago. Those entrepreneurs, in many cases, would decide they had to move away from where they were, go to one of the coasts, particularly go to Silicon Valley.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've done some coverage around Pittsburgh, and you would think that would traditionally be manufacturing, but they've been one of the leaders in being progressive with the EV space. So to your point, it's not just California or New York. What tech sectors is Revolution bullish on right now?
Well, I just want to follow up on Pittsburgh. Carnegie Mellon is one of the great universities, but 15 years ago, they were seeing most of the people, once they graduated, leaving Pittsburgh, going to the coast. Now there's a slowing of that brain drain, and even a boomerang of people returning. And some companies like Duolingo, the language app, started and scaled in Pittsburgh based on some of that Carnegie Mellon connection. There's a lot of sectors that are up for grabs. We at Revolution, we believe there's 2 mega themes to focus on. One is place. It ties in with Rise of Rest, looking at places where maybe other investors typically aren't looking. The other is policy. Some of the most important industries and the largest industries, like healthcare and food and agriculture, financial services, transportation, education, all have a policy regulatory aspect to them. And so those are important to focus on. And Congress did pass in the last couple of years about $3 trillion of legislation with the Inflation Reduction Act and the focus on infrastructure, the CHIPS and Science Act. So I think there's a real boost in terms of innovations that's going to happen in those sectors, and they're going to happen in different places all around the country. So those are some of the areas that we're particularly focused on, both place and policy, and particularly when they really converge.
Let's expand on the regulatory environment. What are your thoughts around that when it comes to mergers and acquisitions?
I'm not surprised that some of these really big companies are getting more scrutiny when they're looking to make acquisitions. It's always a challenge. It's sort of the companies are sources of acquisition for young companies, and obviously that's of interest to venture capitalists. But also there is a risk of big tech getting bigger, and there is much more focus on that, including around AI, where there recently was some hearings here in Washington, D.C. around AI. How do you unleash these new technologies, but do it in a way that can have a positive impact on society, hedge against some of the negative risks that could exist there, but also do it in a way that really promotes competition. And one part of that may be having these big platform companies open up their language models so that younger startups can build on those models. So that it's because the internet's now become so important, because other technologies like AI have emerged so quickly. It's not surprising to me that governments, not just in Washington, but in Europe and many other parts of the world, are focusing more on what's happening and trying to figure out how to strike the right balance between allowing innovation to flourish, which sometimes argue for a lighter touch approach, while also trying to make sure people understand some of the risks, and we are, as a society, are trying to manage and hedge against some of those risks.
Let's shift gears and go to another area of policy. Let's talk about the AI talent skills gap and how immigration policy is exacerbating that.
Yeah, a great concern. And one of the amazing things about this country over the last 200 years is that it's been a magnet for talent. People from all around the world have wanted to be part of America, and a lot of entrepreneurs also have come here and started and scaled companies, including some of our most successful companies. Almost half of the Fortune 500, almost half of the Silicon Valley successful companies were started by immigrants or children of immigrants. So it really is troubling that we've become a country that's harder to come to, and harder if you are here and you're getting a PhD, for example, to stay here. That's a broader problem, but it's a particular problem when you think about some of the technologies of the future in the industries of the future. How do we make sure we're winning that battle for talent? I've been focused on this, put aside Revolution, my investment firm. Also, I've been co-chairing the National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And this has been an area we're focused on. How do we develop our own talent, obviously, and do it in a smarter way? But how do we also attract talent from all around the world to make sure we have the expertise we need to continue to lead, to continue to be the most innovative entrepreneurial nation in the world.
Yeah, and that's why having that regulatory framework and legislation is so key. Steve, as you know, let's say in the blockchain space, for example, we're seeing the outflow of talent to places like Europe or Southeast Asia where that framework is there. And we don't want to be behind in that race. I mean, I'm sure you would agree that we're transitioning into a digital economy. And that's one area in tech where, we're starting to see where that brain drain is very obvious, in other words.
Yeah, and I hope it's a wake-up call for people, because if you look at the data on venture capital, 30 years ago, over 90% of global venture capital was invested in the United States. Now it's less than 50%. We've seen the globalization of venture capital, the globalization of entrepreneurship, the globalization of innovation. So it's game on. We need to make sure we have the right policies in this country, including on immigration, to make sure we win in the next this next battle. And we also need to do it in a more inclusive way. Right now, there are a lot of people in different parts of the country that do feel kind of left out and left behind. And that's in part, not entirely, but in part because most of the new companies that are creating most of the new jobs are not in those places, they're on the coast. And so part of the effort around Rise the Rest, and part of the reason even to write the book, was try to inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs, encourage investors to pay more attention to what's happening all around the country. Some of the great opportunities, including the opportunities to create top quartile returns for funds, are going to be in different parts of the country. And as I said before, the pandemic is an accelerant. Public policy, including some of this recent legislation's an accelerant. So I think it's an exciting time, but we do need to make sure we win in what's now a global battle, and do it in a more inclusive way within our country, so we are creating opportunity for more people in more places.
All right, Steve, we appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thanks, Jill.